Good afternoon. I'm Shelley Jones, Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement at Missouri State University. The Alumni Association is the organization through which Missouri State students continue their connection with MSU when they leave the university. The Alumni Association is a non-dues paying organization, so all of our alumni are viewed as members. If you are new to our Bear Talk series, these are monthly webinars, professional development sessions now offered in a virtual format. So how today's webinar will work. We can't see or hear you. Please use the Q&A feature to ask questions. The session is being recorded. All registrants will receive a follow-up email from me on Monday afternoon with additional resources, contact information for our panelists, a brief survey, and the recorded link. Unfortunately, due to time limitations, we will not be able to get to every question. So back in March, we spotlighted 3 Missouri State alumna as part of our Women Who Rock session. This time we are spotlighting 3 men in our Bear Talks webinar, Cool Careers, You Do What? Today we have with us 3 amazing alumni, each with unique stories to tell. Brian Arata from Los Angeles, California, Michael Frizzell from Springfield, Missouri, and Matt Riethel from St. Louis, Missouri. So how we would like to format today's session is to visit with each of our panelists individually before bringing them all back together for the last 15 minutes so we can do some general Q&A with them. So let's go ahead and start with Brian. Brian can join us. There we go. Brian graduated in 1998 from MSU with a degree in education. His mom was a teacher, his brother was a teacher, and Brian too became a teacher. He taught orchestra at Pipkin and Carver Middle Schools, as well as Parkview High School here in Springfield, Missouri. But then his career trajectory changed. Without knowing a soul there, he packed up his SUV and a U-Haul trailer, and he headed to LA with a dream to become a film composer. So welcome, Brian, and thank you for being with us here today to share your story.
Oh, so glad to be here. This is great.
Okay, so let's start with, how did MSU and your experience as a teacher help prepare you for what you're doing now?
Right. So being at MSU, there's plenty of opportunities for music. I went there to primarily join the marching band. I played trombone in the marching band, but I also played violin in the orchestra. So I had lots of opportunities to play with jazz groups, marching band, concert band, orchestras, smaller groups. I also played piano in some of these groups. I even played in a little polka band for a while. So I think that variety of music that was available at MSU greatly helped me out with what I do today. So.
And I know you were telling me before about with your students in the middle school that you were doing composing some popular songs. You want to talk about that a little bit too?
Yeah. So those last, when I first started teaching, I was kind of noticing that maybe the method book wasn't quite covering some things, or maybe a class was falling a little bit behind where they should be. So I was writing these little technique compositions to kind of supplement. And for the most part, it was working out pretty well. You know, the kids were learning more. They were enjoying it more because they were being more successful at it. And then when they moved on to high school, they were better prepared. So I was really enjoying it. The kids are learning, it's great. And then when I was at Parkview one day, a student asked me, he said, "Hey, can we play the music to Pearl Harbor? I just saw that movie in the theater." I said, "Well, let me see if I can transcribe it." So I transcribed what we played in class, and it was a big hit. And then that became a thing. I started doing these other transcriptions of popular movies. We did Lord of the Rings. We did Chronicles of Narnia, the first Harry Potter. Those were all very popular at that time. And the kids are very motivated to learn these things because they're very popular movies. And some of that stuff's very difficult. And so it's elevating the performance level of every student. So all that stuff kind of worked out really well. I was really getting into it. The kids are learning. But those last couple of years of teaching, I was kind of really getting more into that side of it, the composition, the transcriptions. So I just got into my head, I want to be a film composer. And so that was the decision to move to Los Angeles.
So that's what inspired you to go ahead and make that career move to LA then, right?
Yeah, primarily doing those compositions for the kids to play, and then those transcriptions. But I've been a huge fan of film music, all along, and it's just something I was always interested in, and I was really getting into it those last couple of years of teaching. So that was kind of the catalyst for the decision.
Great. And I know that you have this terrific story about how you got your foot in the door. I know that this line of work has got to be extremely competitive. So share with our listeners how you did it, how you got that first step in.
Yeah, absolutely. I get asked this a lot. It's a pretty interesting story. So I just want to keep sharing it with as many people as possible. So I was doing, last years of teaching, moving to Los Angeles, driving myself out. But prior to that, I had been in contact with Ron Jones, and he was a composer for Family Guy, the TV show at that time. And I was just a fan of the show, and I was looking at the credits, and it said music by Ron Jones. So I did a Google search, found his website, sent him an email. I said, hey, I'm moving to Los Angeles pretty soon. Do you need an orchestrator? Do you need an assistant? Can I get you some coffee? I make great coffee, anything to be around it, And he sends back this gigantic email of, oh, you don't want to be involved in the film industry. It's terrible. It's awful. It's oversaturated with composers. Oh, and if you do get a job, it's crazy deadlines and crazy hours. Why would anyone want to do this? But if you still want to put up with all that, come meet me at a recording session and we'll see what we'll see. So I was like, yeah, of course I want to do all this. This guy responded. It's a huge TV show, huge opportunity. Of course I want to do all that. And so I met up with him at this recording session, and he's a very nice guy, complete opposite of his email. I think he was trying to scare me off, actually, but he's a very nice guy. And we hit it off, and he has this 3-month training period that you have to go through to get to be on the show. You have to do a bunch of new software programs, mixing, mastering techniques, instrument samples, none of which I had any experience with. So I really had to work hard to get to be good enough to be on the show. But when the orchestra played something that I had orchestrated that first time, 70-piece orchestra, some of the best musicians in the world playing something I had orchestrated, and one read, it sounded so amazing. It just hooked me right in. So that's how it all kind of got started, with that one job. And I was extremely lucky with that whole thing, because prior to my email, a few days earlier, he had fired somebody. And so right when I needed a job, he was looking for a new guy. So, that's initially why he took that first meeting.
And I think that when you talk about kind of the timing, like what role has perseverance and tenacity and luck and just timing played in your success?
Yeah. I was very, very lucky with the timing on that one. With Guardians of Galaxy 2, it's the same situation. A guy had quit on Tyler. Tyler Bates is a composer for that one. A guy had quit on him, and then he needed a guy right when I was looking for a job. So again, extremely lucky. But in the meantime, I'm learning all these new things, really working hard, going out and meeting filmmakers and networking, and doing the hard work to make sure I'm prepared for all these jobs. But those two big ones, just really just blind luck,
So your recommendation is to send random emails to strangers and ask for a job. That worked for you and can be a good strategy, huh?
Well, I wouldn't say it's a good strategy, because mostly you don't hear anything back. It's mostly, or thanks for your interest. We don't need anybody right now. But most of the time you hear nothing. And the few times I did get something, and this one, the Family Guy one was, again, the real catalyst. It was just luck. But yes, I send out tons and tons of emails all the time trying to get things. Most of the time you just don't hear anything, but you never know. Cold emailing may work. You never know. The one thing I will say about all that is the connections you make and the recommendations from other people. Okay. The face-to-face, that has gotten me more jobs than anything. Okay. Being here in Los Angeles, going to all these film meet and greets, they're happening all the time. There's film festivals, there's film premieres, little, smaller independent film premieres. There's filmmakers all over the place. Not so much now during the pandemic, but prior to the pandemic, it was just nonstop. So it's lots of opportunity to meet people. And then you make these connections, they recommend you to the next person. And I've gotten a majority of my work that way. But, again, the cold emailing may work for you, but it's the odds are against you greatly.
All right, so you've been an orchestrator out in LA and a composer. Can you share a little bit about what those two terms mean?
Okay, get asked this a lot. You know, people see the big credit, Guardians of the Galaxy 2, Family Guy, orchestrator. What is that? Sounds like orchestra. What is it? I don't understand. Okay, so let's say I'm working on Guardians of the Galaxy 2. Tyler Bates is the composer. I'm the orchestrator. All right, so he's watching the movie, and then he writes this little piano piece or something that is going to be the composition for that scene. There's just one specific scene. He hands me that piano piece. I look at it and I go, oh, this is the melody line. So I'm going to give that melody to trumpets, let's say. And I go back to Tyler's piano piece and I say, oh, these are harmony notes. I'm going to give those to clarinets, French horns, violas, maybe. All right. I'll go back to Tyler's part. What's left? Low range notes. So I'm going to give that to low range instruments, tuba, string bass, what have you. So that's basically what an orchestrator is. He's adapting music so that it can be played by an orchestra. Now, it may come from a piano piece. It may come from a 4 or 5 line staff, what have you. It depends on the composer, but that's basically what it is. Now, there's 10,000 other things you got to know, but that's a real simple explanation of what an orchestrator is. Now, as far as composing, I mean, that's a whole different thing. You're creating a mood, you're creating an atmosphere, you're deciding on tempo, and that's a whole nother thing. You know, like I said, Tyler was writing that piano piece. He had to think of all that stuff. He's not worried about the orchestrating. That's my job. So yeah, 2 completely separate jobs. A lot of composers do them one and the same. You know, you hear, you know, you think of people, someone like Mozart or Beethoven, they were doing both jobs simultaneously. But on some of these bigger budget movies, TV shows, the time constraints just do not allow it. And so the composer does his job, I do my job, and it's 2 separate things. So there's enough time to get all the work done.
So is this being a composer and an orchestrator, is this a glamorous job for you?
No, you are. This is post-production work. We're behind the scenes. You don't get to meet James Gunn. You don't get to meet Chris Pratt. You don't get to meet the movie stars. I've been to a few premieres. You know, been close to that a little bit, but you know, you don't meet the movie stars. I mean, I've met other movie stars here, but it's not like you're mingling with them in the course of making the project, you know, a TV show, a movie, what have you. No, it's all, I did everything. Everything was done remotely with both those jobs. Aside from Family Guy, you did have to physically be there in the recording studio while the orchestra was there. And I'm in the booth giving notes to the orchestra while they're recording. But, you know, Guardians of the Galaxy 2, that was all done remotely. They recorded in London. All the stuff for Family Guy comes in through email. I send it back, put it on his server. So yeah, it's not red carpets and things like that at all. But it's great work. It's a lot of fun, and you know, just very appreciative to be on both of those projects, and you know, and everything I'm doing out here.
So no green room, no snacks, no, only the ones you provide from your own apartment, right?
No. You don't get a personal groomer. You don't get anything like that. You know, it's just, you don't get any of the frills of the Hollywood elite. You know, I just, you know, walk over to my computer, start working away. And, you know, they do all that stuff. You know, they do all the talk shows and the red carpets and all that. Yeah.
Yes. But it had to be super cool to see your credit pop up on something, right? You know, you've read all these other credits of people that you've admired, and now it's your turn. That had to have been very exciting.
Oh, of course, it truly was. You know, again, I was a huge fan of Family Guy TV shows, watching it every week. I just thought it was hilarious. And then here I am working on it, and I'm watching it on TV, and I'm hearing my music come through the TV. That's weird, you know. And then going to the movie theater, watching Guardians of the Galaxy 2 in the movie theater, hearing that music blasting through the speakers, seeing my name in the credits. That's weird, you know, but it's truly exciting and thrilling, you know, because this is what I set out to do. And, you know, again, here I am doing it. So it's great.
That's awesome. Okay, so before we head on to our next person, I wanted to ask this last question, and we may revisit in the Q&A too. But what advice do you have for someone who's interested in pursuing a career like this?
Okay, yeah, I get asked this a lot, and I got 3. All right. Now, the first 2 are from John Williams. And if you don't know who John Williams is, one of the biggest film composers out there, Indiana Jones, Star Wars, Harry Potter, Jurassic Park, it just goes on and on. I got to meet him backstage at the Hollywood Bowl, and these first 2 are from him, and I agree with them completely. The first one is you got to write music every single day. Every day you got to write music. Keep the creativity going. You know, you don't have to write a whole symphony every day, but keep that creativity going every single day. You got to do it. Number two, from John Williams, you got to network. I was already talking about that earlier. You got to get out there and meet the filmmakers. Okay, there's no question about it. You got to seek them out. And the third one is mine. I truly believe you have to be here in Los Angeles to do what you do. You got to take care of those finances. Okay, when I moved here, I was a little more prepared with a savings account and a job pretty quickly. Seen so many people just run out of money and unfortunately have to move back. So those are my three: write music every day, networking, and take care of the money. So because it is more expensive to live here. All right.
Yeah. Fabulous. Well, thank you so much, Brian. I can't believe our time is up and it's time to move on to the next one. So let's go ahead and bring Michael Frizzell on, please. Hey, Michael, how are you?
Hi, how you doing?
Well, let me tell you a little bit about Michael. He graduated in 1996 from Missouri State with 2 master's degrees, one in theater performance and one in creative writing, and then another master's in creative nonfiction from an Arkansas institution. He's clearly an overachiever with 3 master's degrees, but he discovered a love of reading and writing as a child. He was compensated financially through his first published piece at the ripe old age of 13, and has had multiple publications since. He started collecting comic books in the 1970s. And did you say you had hundreds of thousands of comic books? You were just being serious?
It's true. When we bought our house, I had to tell my wife I need a comic book room. So she just calls it the geek room. And it's just loaded with comics, graphic novels, statues, you name it.
That's great. So, but did you, I'm saying this, but correct me if I'm wrong, never did he imagine though that one day he'd be writing them. So thank you, Michael, for joining us today and allowing us to hear your story.
Great.
So the first question is, so you write biographical comics, right? Is that the official name for them, or?
Yes, I write both fiction and nonfiction books, but the bulk of my publications have been nonfiction or biographies of famous or infamous people.
And when you were a child and you had your hundreds of thousands of comic books, did you read comic books like that?
No.
The nonfiction biographical ones.
No, I mean, there were some that were published that I'm wholly ignored. There were ones in the 80s that were rock stars. Early 80s had one on the Pope. Those sorts of things, they didn't really jump off the shelf to me when you've got, brightly colored superheroes flying and doing crazy things, or like I preferred the science fiction books. So I didn't even know it was a real thing until much later.
Oh, that's great. So a lifelong, of course, you're a lifelong writer. Because I know you have a great story too. So how did you first stumble into this line of work?
Well, and I'm sure I'm going to talk a little bit about this later too, but as a writer, you're writing all of the time. And to break into comic books, you either have to create your own, which means you need, not only as a writer, but you need an artist and a colorist and a letterer and somebody who can do the publication and layout and design, unless you're lucky enough to be all of those, which I'm not. I can't draw a straight line with the help of a ruler. I can't imagine trying to draw them myself. The advice that you usually hear is that you have to publish a lot in different areas to get noticed. If you look at the big 2 comic book publishers, Marvel and DC, they actually say on their websites, don't call us, we'll find you. I find that a little creepy. I don't know, maybe they've got the X-Men finding you psychically somehow, or Batman is doing the research on you. But if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense, right? They're not going to trust their big characters to someone who hasn't published a thing. So how I stumbled into it was just writing a lot. Through both my graduate programs, I was writing. And the professors were always really good at telling me, look, man, just rejection is part of the arts. You continue to just submit. And so early on, I was hurling these things out by mail. Now I'm hurling them out by electronically. Either way, well, a lot like what Brian was saying, sometimes you don't hear a thing. Sometimes you get these rejections right out. Um, and every now and then something hits. Um, in the master's degree for English here at Missouri State, the professors publish a lot in journals, academic journals that are both creative and, more research based. And so they kept encouraging us to do the same and to get our first rejections out of the way and to start to really feel what that was like. And some of my publications hit. And it got the attention of a publisher in Portland who reached out to me and said, I like your voice. I like the things that you're doing. Have you ever tried writing comics? And as you mentioned, no, I hadn't even considered it. This was my escape from the day-to-day job. I would just go home and I would read, and I'd make my weekly pilgrimage to the comic store once a week, and didn't really think about it as a career. Who wouldn't want to try though, right? So I took the 2 contracts he sent me. They were more on spec than anything else. And I wrote, and one of them hit hard, and I'm off. That's kind of what got me started. It was a chance meeting with a publisher through Facebook Messenger, of all things, that got me started.
So you never know when those opportunities are just going to pop up. So
right. Yeah, like in the theater, the professors used to say, there's no job too small, right? You want to get noticed, so get on that stage. So if you audition, they say, well, you have one line in Act 3. Will you accept it? Yes, you'll accept it. Just like when the writers said, hey, I like this. Will you work this poem a little bit more? Absolutely. Let's get that published. That's exactly how that works. Yeah, no job too small. Get started.
So what is involved in writing a biographical comic? Can you kind of walk us through that process?
Sure. The publisher, Tidal Wave, will come up with a list of political figures, musicians, actors, anyone that they feel like is in the news. And my publisher is really good at kind of predicting where things are going to fall. And he'll have me select one. And I usually pick the hard ones because I kind of enjoy those the most, especially the political figures are the toughest to write about. And I just start the research process, pulling as many articles as I can, cross-checking facts, trying to get 3 or 4 independent sources for everything I want to put in it, and creating a timeline of this person's life. So I try to find that moment where, as a reader, I can access this person's feelings or thoughts, maybe what shapes them, and then build up from childhood to their education, to the beginnings of their career, missteps along the way. Those sorts of things help kind of inform that. And then after I've got the timeline done, I watch a ton of videos. I mean, just a lot of interviews and things like that, trying to capture this person's voice. Because I think it's important as the writer to make it sound like the person you're working on. So that was a challenge. After I get that done, I create the script in 3 different ways. I write a play, which is just dialogue really back and forth. Then I start to lay it out on the page because I have to think of a comic book as basically 22 pages, roughly 100 photographs. So if you could think of taking your photograph book, your book from home, and throwing it out onto the floor and then reassembling all these 100 pictures into a coherent story, that's what it feels like. Then I have to describe every panel to an artist who will then translate what I'm hoping to get onto the page in his or her own unique way. After that's done, I go back and rewrite some of the script to fit what the artist has seen in my descriptions, which varies from artist to artist. And that's just getting started.
Wow, what a process. 'Cause I know the research takes a long time. So,
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about your bestseller, the Tiger King one. So I think that you had shared that you didn't know who Tiger King was when you got this opportunity to write about Tiger King. I didn't know who he was either. So we may be the only 2 in the world who don't know Tiger King. So tell us about your Tiger King experience.
Yeah, apparently it had been happening on Netflix and was a big thing during the pandemic. But I was working from home. I currently teach at the university. And I really wasn't paying attention. I was working on my contracts and things like that. And my publisher calls me one night and says, okay, the artist that I want to put on this book and I had this great bad idea. It's a bad idea, and you can say no. They said, we want you to write a prequel to the Netflix Tiger King. And I was like, who's that? And then, of course, they burst out laughing. They think I'm crazy. Like, he says, go back, watch a couple episodes, and then call me back. So I did. I stopped what I was doing, went downstairs, and my wife and I sat down and watched it. We didn't say a word for an hour. I watched the next episode. She looked at me and went, what was that? I said, these people are a hot mess. How am I? Yeah, of course I'm in. I mean, this is crazy talk. And so through that process, I was able to kind of start piecing together the life of the people that you saw on the Netflix thing. And then PETA got involved and sent us more information about the tigers, and it became this book.
And I think you said that you traveled, you did a lot of promotion with this and other radio stations, other countries. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was weird. When it hit, it went crazy. We got a sequel, we got coloring books, and I got attention from all over the world. And this magazine in India was interviewing me, and they said they were familiar with my work. I'm like, wait, I'm in Springfield. How are you? The internet's a great leveler, right? And then my favorite one was I was on the public radio in New Zealand for an hour, just talking about things like the Tiger King and the other comics I'd written about politicians, and my own graphic novel Bender about serial killers. It was a fantastic experience. It really was.
Wow, that's fantastic. So I know we had talked before too about the one that you wrote about Prince, and that you had an opportunity with the radio station to do something kind of unique. You want to share a little bit about that too?
Yeah, sure. When we write about these famous people, well, we don't always get permission right away. We do it on spec, send it to them, and hope that they jump on. When they jump on, it makes the job easier. But when they don't, sometimes they ignore it until publication. And in this case, they ignored it, went, hey, wait, we went in on it. And I got to be on the radio station in Prince's hometown, co-hosting for 2 hours or 3 hours. It was like 3 hours, the songs of Prince. And I got to talk about what it was like as a child and, growing up and listening to his music. And in addition, just talking about what I discovered about his history in the research phase. I got to be a DJ. It was fantastic. I mean, I had a great time.
And you do this all in addition to your full-time plus job at Missouri State. How on earth do you juggle all of this? Do you sleep?
Well, you do see the bags, right? I try. I get up early every day, and I know Brian gave this great advice about practicing music every day. I write every day, 2 or 3 hours a day, every day, and I keep everything. Most of it's junk, and I'll never show it to you, but some of it I use. And in this case, all of these years of writing, I've been doing this since I was like 10 or 11, just writing everything down. It's become part of my work. So even at the university where I run the writing center, for instance, I practice what I preach. I write every day and then try to instill that love for writing on not only my staff, but the students who come into the center.
Okay, and then just one quick last question before we move on to our next one. Our time is just flying today.
It is.
What advice do you have for those interested in pursuing a career like this, besides writing every day, which we
that's number one by far. Number two, this was shocking to me, and I never really thought about it. Your professors or teachers probably always said, you need to write with an audience in mind. I never really thought about it. I know that sounds strange as somebody with 2 degrees in writing, but I never thought about my audience. I wrote for me. And I always felt like writing for me made the passion come out in the work. And so don't worry about who's reading it right now. Worry about pleasing you and making it feel good. But eventually, my advice on this is you got to let it go, which means you got to figure out when to stop and when to submit. The third thing is don't be afraid of rejection. It's okay. People are reading it. If anyone gives you feedback, that's a gift. Look at that feedback constructively and try to build it into your work.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Michael, for joining us. I really appreciate it. And we'll have you back on at the end for the Q&A part. Let's
Sounds
go
great.
ahead and bring Matt Riethel. I always have to like practice saying your name.
You
back
nailed
with-
it. Yeah, well done.
Good. So Matt graduated from Missouri State's Electronic Arts program in 2004, chose Missouri State because of its computer animation program. So technology, I know you had shared with me, was somewhat archaic at the time that you were here. Social media wasn't a thing. LinkedIn wasn't around. Facebook was just getting started.
Sure.
There were no easily accessible interest groups. But still you found a way to break into the gaming industry. So here with us today to share his story is Matt Riethel. So welcome.
Thanks.
Okay, so given the lack of technology available when you were here, how did you network and learn about opportunities in your field?
Yeah, well, I mean, there was technology, but when we compare it to today, right, it looks much more bare. But we had interest among my peers. There was even faculty that had worked in the industry. So there were I think it was just a little less accessible. You really had to rely on like your nearby network of students and faculty and others as guides to help kind of expose those opportunities. But certainly present day, I mean, there's a lot more. I think we're a lot more globally connected. It's a lot easier to research those things, but it was a little bit trickier back then. Yeah.
Yeah. And you too have a great story on how you got your foot in the door. So let's go ahead and share that too.
Yeah, truly analog. So my first job in the video game industry was as a computer modeler for a company that started in Springfield called Black Lantern. And Black Lantern had put a job posting for a 3D modeler for their video game company up on a bulletin board in the animation lab, like those little like pull tab ones that you usually use to like sell a used computer or something, if people even do that anymore. See, that's the old technology, right? Now you use like Facebook Marketplace. But way back in the day, you put these postings up and say, hey, we're looking for somebody to do 3D modeling. And I saw this flyer and I didn't know about the company. So I asked around. I asked my classmates, I asked professors, hey, do you know who Black Lantern is? And they kind of shrug and say, no, we don't know. And I was like, well, I'm thinking about applying. They're like, yeah, sure. Why not? What have you got to lose? There's that little voice in my head to like, go ahead, take the chance. What could it hurt? Convinced me to apply. And it took a little while to fully get connected and to really get on as a modeler. But it was that first step, right? It was answering that could have been passed over a bulletin ad, in the animation lab that gave me my first into the industry.
That's great. And then I think you'd shared that you went on then to hire your professor down the road with the company, right?
Yeah, one of my professors at the time had worked in the industry. And as we kind of grew Black Lantern, there were opportunities for artists. And so, I would spread the word, right? That network, even as current students have, is still super valuable. Those relationships, that trust between your peers, your professors. As we were growing the studio, we needed artists. And so that former instructor came on as an artist with that company also. Yeah.
So how has the technology changed when it comes to building a game from like when you first started to present day?
Well, two of the biggest shifts. The first is the game engine. So the coding, the software, the thing that actually makes the games run. Frequently, if we're talking about like the early 2000s, you'd have to program and code that all yourself. The off-the-shelf software. I'm going to make an analogy. A lot of people know what Photoshop is. So if you're talking about editing a photograph, imagine doing that without any kind of software. You have to make the software yourself before you can get rid of red eye, right? It sounds quite daunting, but that's kind of how games were, in that early 2000s. Present day, we've got tools that you can download for free, tools like Unity, which is the software we use at our studio at Graphite Lab, where you can download these tools and you can get a lot of that underpinning, that foundation, kind of presented to you with a download. And then it's up to you to creatively build on top of that. So that's one of the biggest changes. The other is that everything is very digital now. So it used to be you'd make a game, you'd put it behind the glass at Walmart, you'd cross your fingers, hope that it sells. Now it's very different. We make our games, we digitally distribute them. We don't have to make a cartridge or a box or a plastic case or even send it, to Walmart anymore. We can sell it on the app stores or the eShop. And so costs are way lower. The barrier for entry is way lower. And also the fans' expectations of updates and changes and evolution of your game is much higher. So there's those two big shifts that have happened in the last 17 or so years I've been making games.
Interesting. So how long does it take to build a game? Which I'm sure it varies, but what do you have to respond to that one?
Sure. I always respond with my experience. So the fastest we've ever pumped anything out is probably a couple of months. Those are the tough ones. Those are kind of your crunching, working around the clock. The longest we've ever taken to deliver a game for our team is probably somewhere in the 12 to 18 month range. When we work on our own properties, so we kind of balance our work between games we make for big clients like Nick and Hasbro and Disney, and then games we make for ourselves. The ones we make for ourselves may take longer, right? We're less decisive than our clients at times because we're not building from an existing lore or existing art style guide. We have to make it all up ourselves. So those ones we make for our own studio, our own original property, those take a little bit longer. Those can go 2 or 3 years sometimes.
Okay, all righty. And how do you get a game? How do you get the business?
Oh, well, there's probably not a formula for that either, but certainly having the resume and reputation we have now makes it easier. So we already have games out there that we can point to and we can say, look at this. If you want a game, a match 3 game, we've made those, come hire us. If you want a game about, pixel space aliens and space Marines shooting at each other, we've made one of those, come hire us, But if you're trying to break in that very first time, right, then it's a lot of building on your own, demos or portfolio pieces that can show off that interest and that expertise, or at least that passion for that genre. So if you've always wanted to make a puzzle game, about, escaping from an escape room, then as a student or a recent grad, you should be working on prototyping those mechanics, trying to build out demos of your own, or at least writing up those scenarios as a way to kind of, build that resume before you actually have the published resume. That's kind of how we've moved into a variety of different genres within games, is by doing those demos and prototypes.
Okay. So sometimes they come to you and sometimes you're trying to get them, you're going to them and,
Sure.
and saying, hire us. So
Right.
you had mentioned before when we had talked about a big break with Nickelodeon, that first big break. Do you want to tell them about that?
Sure. This would have been in 2005, maybe 2006. And at the time, we had been making ports, right, conversions of classic board games to the Game Boy Advance. So we're talking about games like Chutes and Ladders, Candyland, Memory, The Game of Life, Payday, like classic board games. And that was going pretty well. But we wanted to do, other titles, and Nickelodeon was under deal terms where they had to produce a game to release in time with a film also. And it was either Nickelodeon or 2K was the publisher. I'm not sure who really was under the gun, but between those two studios, they needed a game out in about 3 months. And we had the reputation for making these games pretty quickly. We've been doing the ports of Candyland and Chutes and Ladders and all those to where we'd called these guys multiple times. They knew who we were. We kept asking for opportunities to work with them. And it wasn't until they had this really fast, really tight development schedule where they're like, all right, if you really want to work with us, you'll go take this challenge on. And it was for the Dora the Explorer franchise license, which wasn't massive at the time, but everybody knew what Dora was. It would go on to be a $1 billion franchise eventually. We had to make that game in less than 3 months, and it was a lot of, overnight and crunching and other stuff. It was pretty tough, but that gave us the resume piece to do more Nickelodeon stuff. And we do the same thing with Hasbro and Disney and all these companies we got to kind of stretch to get that first one. Might not be as comfortable as we'd like, But once we get in there, our reputation for repeat projects is pretty high.
So just do it, spend the time because it led to other opportunities for you then, right?
It's our philosophy that's worked for us. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So how have you been able to change the gaming landscape in St. Louis, Missouri?
Wow, that's an awesome question. I'll say at least that's my mission. Have I changed it yet? I'm not quite sure. Graphite has gone from being just me in an apartment to now over 20 working professionals. There have been other studios that have grown here in St. Louis that have done some really tremendous work that we, like to think of ourselves, if not mentors, more as colleagues, somebody that can provide feedback and just kind of expertise and support. But I've also contributed to a growing game design program where I'm at right now at Maryville University to grow more opportunities for aspiring game developers to pursue traditional four-year education and learning what it takes to become a game designer, to work in the industry and so forth. So those are kind of my goals and my mission is to continue to grow in those channels. I feel like, if we keep pushing on education, we keep pushing on professional opportunities, if we keep pushing on those items, that will continue to grow things here in St. Louis. Great,
great. So, and I know that your company does offer internships and things like that. And you had mentioned at one point that this is a career that does have kind of a higher turnover. Is that right? In general?
A lot of passionate industries do, musicians and artists and game developers among them. So a lot of people get into the industry because they want to make, the game of their dreams, and that's still a possibility. But sometimes it takes time to get to that level, so it can be maybe a bit of a rude awakening. You get in the industry and you think you're going to go make that, Minecraft clone like day one. I got a job. I'm going to go make Minecraft 2. Look at me, everybody. And it might just not happen that way. So, I think it's important to maintain a passion for the industry while still balancing, the fact that, this can be a very long career, if you kind of pace yourself appropriately. But yeah, there was a lot of turnover, especially when I started in the early 2000s. Lots of overtime, lots of hardworking conditions that hopefully have been continuing to improve.
So tell them a little bit about, and we may talk about this more in the Q&A, a little bit about the internship program that you offer.
Sure.
Through your company.
It's evolved a little bit because of pandemic. Historically, we would do up to 4 internships every summer. Students would come in, they would work. We would use our full-time staff to coach them through game ideas of their own with guidance, of course. With our team now working largely remote, we've switched it into more of like junior apprenticeship programs. So it's changed who we can take on just slightly, but we still bring in with intention junior and entry-level employees into territories like quality assurance, maybe some junior artists, junior programmers, that sort of thing. And our numbers of how many we can take on continue to shift based on reactions to working remotely. But it's always been a goal of mine to extend those internships, keep creating those opportunities for students.
Great, great. Well, thanks, Matt. So let's leave you on and go ahead and let's bring Michael and Brian back on with us. And let's go ahead and move into some of our Q&A. We had some pre-submitted questions, which we'll go through some of those. And I know that we have had some other ones submitted too. So my eyes will be darting all over the place. So lots to talk about. Alrighty, so the first question, I'll just throw it out there and then whoever wants to tackle this one. What would be the best way for a young person interested in an arts career to engage with creators? And what would be a good way to build a portfolio? Who wants to tackle that one?
I mean, I can jump on it.
Okay.
I mean, being a professor myself, I get this question a lot, but this is something where I think if this is coming from a student, professors are great resources, right? I think your classmates, your colleagues can be great resources. I don't know if there's such a thing as too much feedback, but ultimately I would tailor your portfolio towards work that you would like to get. A small story is we had somebody who applied for an internship, wasn't a good fit, kept working on art that more aligned with our portfolio, brighter, lighter, more family-friendly content. And then we were able to kind of, kind of make that connection. So yeah, I'll try to keep my answer brief so we can get to a bunch of them. But I would say rely on professors and classmates and others to give feedback, but then tailor towards the type of work you'd like to do or you'd like to earn.
Okay. We had a question submitted that Michael Frizzell would like to answer. How do you find the collaborators you need? For instance, the writer who needs an artist.
That was one of the things that kept me out of comic book writing to start with. Like I said earlier, I can't draw myself. My brother is a graphic designer. So one of the first graphic novels I sold outside the company I work with, he illustrated it. So I guess it's not a good answer to say, have your mother give birth to your collaborator. That's probably not a great answer. In the case of the publisher I work with, he's finding it. He's finding the people I need to work together. He's teaming us up. He's finding the good fits based on voice and project. That's been helpful a lot. Other collaborations that I've done in the past have been just really casting my net out there a little bit. I use social media sometimes to find artists who want to work. And that's a tough challenge because sometimes you're asking people to work for very little with the hope of something happening down the road, unless you've got the money and capital to do that. That's why I suggested earlier, I think you should write as much as you can, publish as much as you can, and keep working. As kind of Matt pointed out, you're pointing toward a certain direction, right? You're building this portfolio that makes sense. So that's kind of my answer from that question online.
Okay, and Matt, we had a question that's kind of somewhat similar that's kind of directed to you. How do you get connected with people who could create music and audio for your games?
Man, I might not be the best to answer this, but we found a local composing duo that does a lot of sound and music for our games. They're here in St. Louis, but when we were making our game Hive Jump, we found a different composer out and kind of in the world. And we really loved their work. We had played a game that this composer had made music for. And then kind of like Brian was talking about earlier, we just wrote an email. That particular composer missed our email for months. We went by thinking, oh, they think we're terrible. He's not going to do it. So I sent it again. And he said, I have no idea how I missed it the first time. I'd love to make music for your game. But we sent an email that wasn't like, hey, Jimmy, you want to write music for us? We said, here's our game. Here's why we want you. Your music on this game is amazing, and we feel like it fits our game. So do your research, do your homework, be authentic in the interest you have in that composer. But yeah, we just found composers that we liked by looking at games and listening to games where we liked the music, and we just started writing emails.
Okay. So Brian, how do you go about pitching your music to directors and studios to build a network and find projects?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I would I have ever pitched to a studio, but I have pitched to directors, and everything everybody else is saying, tailor it to the project you want. Or you want to do a horror movie, write some horror tracks, send it to the director. You want to do a comedy, and so forth. And coming up with a really good, show reel that is just a highlight of everything you can do, just bullet points of everything that you're best at. Okay. I'm not a great horror music writer, so I tend not to go for those jobs, but I try to do a little more, lighthearted things that, space adventure, Star Wars type of music. So I tend to write more of those things and go after those projects. So it's more based what you're interested in, get some tracks going for it, submit it to the director, not necessarily to a studio. I wouldn't even know where to go in a studio setting to submit tracks, but yeah, go after the directors, the producers of the show.
Okay, this was a question that was submitted in advance. What tips do you have for young women looking to enter these seemingly hostile industries in the age of Me Too? So maybe that's a Matt and Michael question. You want to take it, Michael? Start off?
Sure. Comic books of late have seen more diversity in writers, artists, and creators working on them. I'm glad to see that. I'm glad to see superheroes and things like that reflecting the populace of the United States in a way that makes more sense. When I started collecting in the 70s and 80s, it was more of a white male power fantasy kind of teenager thing. And kind of, you know, people didn't really pay much attention to it. They didn't think of it as literature or anything that had anything to say until later in the 80s. And now what we're seeing is more women, more people of color, LGBTQIA. And this is fantastic because I start to see yourselves reflected in the work. Makes sense. What advice do I have? It's the same advice I give everybody is that you've got to publish and get out there and get your voice out there and be heard. There are a lot of websites nowadays, and even Twitter and Instagram are good for this. If you create your own comic book or comic strips, share it with the world. You never know who's going to notice. Start tagging people in it, and they can always untag themselves if they don't like it. But, you know, you've got to get your voice out there. Otherwise, you're going to be sitting in wherever you are in your hometown like I did, going, now what, right? Take a risk, take a chance. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
Okay, Matt, do you have some things to add to that question?
Yeah, when I hear this question, I kind of think about I have 3 daughters, and my middle daughter's really into the video games and YouTube and all these other kind of new technologies. And so I think about what advice I might, share with her. And I think it can be beyond just, one-on-one advice, but just industry wide of just making sure people are continually educating each other about what's, acceptable in the workplace, making sure these some of the conditions that we might talk about of having happened over the last 20 years, making sure that those are brought to light and making sure that from an educational perspective, that we address these topics as early as, in like the educational setting, then again, reinforce in the professional setting. So as the dialogue continues to grow, as more and more in the industry continue to take stands on what's, acceptable and what type of industry we'd like to be a part of, I think there'll be more support from our peers to continue that process going forward. So I think, it's something that'll never reach a finish line. It's a maintenance thing. We have to continually focus on these topics. It's not like we get to the 3rd step and like, hey, we solved it. Things are, professionally, responsible now. These are going to have to be maintained issues. So keeping attention on it and continuing to strive for the industry that we want to be a part of, I think is the way we have to go with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I'll say a couple of things, just completely agree with Matt and Michael. But there is a lot more awareness in Los Angeles. I think there's a lot more awareness going on. I've been on a couple of film sets and people are more aware of it. I'm just saying, maybe if there's a situation arises, maybe report it. But I see a lot of, female composers up and coming. The Loki show on Marvel, that's a female composer. Captain Marvel was done by a female composer. There's a lot of great composers and they're female, they're coming up. So yeah, keep trying and keep doing what you're doing, and you'll be a strong voice as many already are. So.
All right. And we've touched on this a little bit, but maybe if you all have any other remarks for this, a majority of folks may feel that in these types of creative industries that you have to live in a big city. You have to live in the LAs, you have to live in the Atlantas in order to be successful. And I think that, Matt and Michael, I mean, you're Midwest and you've proven that may not be the case, but in your case, Brian, it was beneficial. So does anybody have any other maybe comments on that about, do you need to work in a big city in order to be successful in a creative field like this?
Well, I think it's essential. And I've gotten the majority of my work through physically being here. I would not have gotten Family Guy if I had not physically been here. I would not have gotten Guardians of the Galaxy 2 if I had not been here. But also, like I was saying earlier, going out to these film festivals, going out to premieres and meeting people, it's much better than anything you can do over the internet. Yes, I did a lot of things through email, but the majority of my work I've gotten through the face-to-face. So I think it's absolutely essential to be in Los Angeles if you want to be in the film industry.
Mine can be some of both. Like I've never worked out of San Francisco or Seattle, but I've had, friends and colleagues who have moved to the coast to work at a particular studio. So let's say I wanted to work as an employee of Ubisoft. I probably wouldn't do that from St. Louis, even though remote has made it easier to do so. but my work's a little bit different. Like we're working on behalf of those companies as a vendor, as a collaborator. So for us, being in a lower cost location was always a competitive advantage. So we could be a little bit more cost effective. We could recruit a little bit differently. But a lot of industry of teams in our industry have been working remotely, and some of them have been finding that that's their path forward. Graphite's been remote for almost 16 months now. I mean, since last March. And we've had our biggest year that we've ever put together, financially, release wise. Everything's just been better as a remote team. So with that, we've been able to recruit from different places, and I would imagine that flexibility is showing in some of these other big studios. But kind of a case by case basis. But my stubborn mind is here in St. Louis because I want to grow games in my hometown. So I've got a bit of a higher purpose there of why I'm in the Midwest.
And what would be the most, this was pre-submitted, what would be the most effective way to seek out internship opportunities in the field of art? And this one was referring to animation student. They find limited opportunities on the surface level of the internet. Is there a better way, better place to find additional openings? So anything that the three of you would like to add that maybe we haven't already talked about?
I know a lot of colleges have internship offices that can help you connect. Missouri State does. I guess I should say that, right? And absolutely, that's a good way to start because any companies in the immediate area or some of the larger cities are going to feed into the university system in some ways. Your professors are great resources for that as well, like Matt mentioned earlier.
Yeah. Which I would like to also mention, and you probably already know this, if you are an alumni of Missouri State, you can use the resources of the Career Center as a student, but also as an alum. So take advantage of those. So, okay. So I need to probably, it's about time I close this out. So 30 seconds for each of you. Any last thoughts you want to share? How about Matt? We'll start with you.
I'll say take the chance, leave that in your mind, right? There's going to be things you're thinking about. Even this internship opportunity, you probably think of a place, you're like, I should send them some work. Take the chance, send them the work, exhaust yourself, swing again. I have a list of 500 different partners that we'd want to work with as Graphite Lab as a studio. And I'm sending emails constantly and getting told no a lot and getting ignored even more. So just get in the habit of getting your work out there. My advice is just go out there, take the chance.
All right, Michael, you're next.
Do it because you love it. Do it because you love it. This is hard stuff. Getting in the arts, there's lots of rejection. There's people turning their back, closing doors, no answers. Do it because you don't have any other choice. This is what you love and what you feel.
Okay, Brian.
Yeah, same thing. Keep trying. There's lots of rejection out there, but you'll get lucky every once in a while, but you just don't give up trying. One thing I always think about when I'm writing something for a new project or a new director, I remember seeing the behind the scenes of Star Wars, and George Lucas said the only thing that exceeded his expectations for the first Star Wars movie was the music. And so I try to have that mindset on every single project I have. I want to be the best aspect of this project. So that guy recommends me for that project, and then I can keep going. So I just keep that in my mind at all times whenever I'm working on a project, but keep going. There will be a lot of rejection. Just keep at it. Keep doing it.
Awesome. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Our panelists, thank you so much. We hope that you enjoyed what you heard today and are leaving here inspired. If you have suggestions on topics or alumni speakers, please include them on the survey that you're going to be receiving Monday in the follow-up email. Again, you will receive some contact information for these panelists. So if your question did not get answered today, or it's very specific, you think of one, reach out to them. You can tell they're very personable and down to earth, and they want to give a lift up to other people too. So our next Bear Talks webinar will be Thursday, October 7th from noon to 1 p.m. Central. We did change up our topic a little bit for October. Instead, it's going to be the vanishing workforce, attracting and retaining talent. So join us October 7th. Probably mid next week, we'll have that out. So watch your emails and get registered for that. So thank you everyone again for joining us, and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks.